My name is Silas, and I never imagined my greatest wound would come from my own flesh and blood. After my home was robbed, stripped of every memory of my late wife, I turned to my son for shelter. Instead of comfort, he looked me in the eye and said, "I don't need another mouth to feed." That single sentence cut deeper than the burglary itself. But what I would uncover next, the truth hiding in plain sight on his mantle, would change the course of our family forever. This story is not just about betrayal. It's about the painful choice between love and justice. Before we begin, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked for more powerful stories. After the robbery, I asked my own son for a couch, and he called me another mouth to feed. Those words cut deeper than any wound left by the intruders who had ripped through my home. I stood in the wreckage of the place I'd shared with my late wife, glass crunching under my shoes, and felt more abandoned than ever before. The house was a disaster. Picture frames shattered, the coffee table overturned, drawers ripped open, and Ella's jewelry box emptied like it never mattered. That box once sang a tune every night, "The Way You Look Tonight," a melody that carried her perfume and her laughter. Now it lay silent, stripped of everything but memory. I called the police, and 2 officers walked through my home like it was a crime scene out of a television show. Their boots pressed into the carpet where I had once knelt to propose to my wife. Their gloved hands bagged up remnants of my life like pieces of evidence. "Looks like they knew exactly where to go," one officer remarked, shining his flashlight across the open safe. This wasn't random. The words stayed with me long after the patrol cars left. Knew exactly where to go. It wasn't just the loss of things, it was the violation of trust, of routine, of memory. I looked at the empty space on the mantel where Ella's favorite clock had been, and felt the silence of the house weigh on me like an anchor. When night came, I reached for the phone. My hands trembled not from age, but from the fear of rejection. "Son," I said when Melvin answered, "I can't stay here tonight. Could I come by for a few days?" There was a pause, television noise in the background. Then his voice, sharp, colder than the night air seeping through my broken back door. "Dad, I don't need another mouth to feed right now. You'll figure something out." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in disbelief. For 35 years, I had never once turned him away. Through scraped knees, bad grades, broken hearts, and even the down payment for his house, I had been there. But now, when I needed him for the very first time, my own son left me to the darkness. I pulled a jacket over my shoulders and walked next door to Roy's house. Roy, my neighbor for more than 2 decades, opened his door before I could even knock. His porch light spilled across the lawn, and his face showed the kind of concern I had prayed to see in my son's eyes. "Come in, Silas," he said softly, guiding me toward the warmth of his home. That night, as I lay on Roy's couch staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed louder than the ticking of any clock. If the thieves knew exactly where to look, it had to be someone close. And the closer I looked, the more painful the answer seemed. Before I go further, let me ask you, if your own child turned you away in your darkest hour, what would you do? Silence can be loud. That night, it was the loudest thing in Roy's living room. I lay there on his couch, the ticking of his wall clock steady and merciless, reminding me of everything I had lost, my house, my peace. And now, perhaps most devastating of all, the comfort of knowing my son would be there when I needed him. Roy moved around quietly, the way men who had served in the military often do, measured and precise. By morning, he had a pot of coffee waiting and a blanket folded at the edge of the couch, as if I were his own brother instead of just his neighbor. "Silas," he said gently, sliding a mug toward me. "I told the officers what I saw last week." I looked up, startled. What do you mean? He sipped his coffee before answering. I saw Melvin's car in your driveway. Not once, twice. Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon while you were away. Figured he was checking in on things for you. Good boy, I thought. But now... His voice trailed off. The steam from my cup blurred my vision as I tried to process his words. My son's car, in my driveway. During the very week my safe was emptied, my drawers ransacked, Ella's jewelry stolen. I wanted to believe it was what Roy first thought, that Melvin had been looking after me, protecting what was mine. But why hadn't he mentioned it when I called? Why had his voice cracked with something that sounded more like guilt than concern? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my engineer's mind. Logic first, emotions later. If Melvin had been at the house, there had to be a reason. Maybe he saw something suspicious. Maybe he even scared off the burglars. But then why not tell me? Why avoid my eyes when I stood on his porch yesterday? Roy, I finally said, thank you for telling me. I'll ask him about it. I need to be sure before I let my mind run too far. He nodded, though his eyes told me he already suspected the same thing I did. Just be careful, Silas. Sometimes the answers we find are heavier than we're ready to carry. That day I returned to my house in the daylight, determined to face the mess one corner at a time. I righted a lamp, swept the broken glass into a pan, and stacked the overturned books. But the harder I worked, the more I saw the gaps. The safe pried open, the mantel stripped, Ella's perfume bottle gone from our dresser. Every piece missing felt like a finger pointing towards someone who knew the layout of my home as well as I did. I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing hard, and whispered aloud, "Who would do this?" The answer came back not in sound, but in memory, my son's face pale when I appeared unannounced, his eyes darting away from mine. That night, as I sat again in Roy's kitchen with a fresh cup of coffee, I made a decision. I would not accuse. I would not shout. I would observe, record, and confirm. My son might think me old, weak, and alone, but he had forgotten the one thing I had always carried with me: patience. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you confront your child right away? Or would you wait for the truth to reveal itself? I told myself there had to be a better explanation. That's what fathers do. We give our children the benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence piles up like storm clouds on the horizon. So the next morning, I drove to Melvin's townhouse. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they had in years, and I prayed silently that my suspicions would be proven foolish. When he opened the door, his face looked startled, as if my presence had interrupted something he wasn't ready to explain. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he asked. His voice strained. "Just wanted to talk," I said softly. He stepped aside, and I walked into a living room that seemed weighed down with clutter. Dirty dishes crowded the coffee table, magazines and bills scattered across every surface. The place smelled faintly of beer and stale cigarettes, an odor Ella would have scolded him for letting linger. I settled into the couch while he busied himself clearing papers. His leg bounced as he spoke words quick and thin. "Look, Dad, about the other night. I was tired. Didn't mean to sound harsh." I nodded. "We all get tired. But family should be there when it matters, don't you think?" My words hung in the air, and for a moment his eyes darted away toward the corner of the room. That's when I saw it. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a pocket watch. At first glance, it looked ordinary, brass face leather band. But the shape caught my eye, and my heart began to pound. I leaned forward, staring as the light caught the crown, bent at the same angle I remembered from when I dropped it as a boy. My father's watch, my grandfather's watch, the one I had kept locked in my safe. "Nice piece," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach churned. Melvin followed my gaze and shrugged. "Picked it up at a pawn shop. Cheap find. Guy didn't know its value. The words landed like a stone in my chest. Pawn shop. Cheap. As if 3 generations of history could be reduced to a trinket on his mantle. I smiled faintly, not trusting my voice, and sipped the water he had offered me. But inside something shifted. A wall cracked. The denial I had been clinging to crumbled into dust. The officers had said the burglar knew exactly where to look. Roy had seen Melvin's car, and now my son held the most intimate piece of evidence in plain sight, wrapped in a lie so casual it chilled me. Still, I forced myself to remain calm. I thanked him for the water, made a few polite comments, and said I had to get back. He seemed relieved to see me leave, as if my presence had been a burden. As I drove away, my mind spun with memories teaching him to ride a bike, fixing his first car, paying for his wedding. I wanted desperately to believe he had found that watch by chance. But the truth gleaming on his mantle told me otherwise. If you had been in my shoes, staring at your family's legacy sitting in your child's home, would you confront him then and there, or hold back for the sake of certainty, some heirloom's whisper? This one shouted. That pocket watch on Melvin's mantle might as well have been screaming my name. I drove home with my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the same question circling again and again. How could my own son steal from me? When I stepped back into my ruined house, the air felt heavier than before, as if every overturned drawer and broken frame was pointing me toward the truth I didn't want to face. I sat at my desk, staring at the empty safe, and pressed my fingers against my temples. The watch had scratches I knew by heart, the same bent crown I'd seen since childhood. There was no mistake. But I also knew myself. If I confronted him on emotion, it would erupt into shouting, maybe violence, and nothing would be solved. 30 years as an engineer had taught me something invaluable. Problems required evidence, not hunches. Equations, not accusations. I took out a notepad from the mess on my desk and began to write. Dates, times, who knew I was away, and what had been taken. Each detail went down in careful script, my anger cooling into a methodical plan. The more I listed, the clearer the picture became. Someone had known my travel schedule, the location of the safe, and the value of the heirlooms inside. Someone had entered not to destroy, but to strip me clean with precision. My son had the watch. He had the knowledge. And Roy had seen his car. But even then I told myself, don't rush. If I was wrong, I'd be condemning my only child unjustly. I needed confirmation that would hold up in any courtroom or any conscience. So I started making calls. Pawn shops, consignment stores, anywhere that might have seen Ella's jewelry or my electronics. Each conversation was brief, businesslike, but my heart pounded every time an owner said, "Yes, I think I remember something like that." I took notes, times, and names. The beginnings of a trail were forming, faint but undeniable. That night, back on Roy's couch, he poured me another cup of coffee and studied me with his steady veteran's eyes. "You look like you've just drawn up battle plans," he said. "I have," I admitted. "But this isn't a battle I can fight with fists. It's one I have to fight with proof." Roy nodded. "Then fight it carefully. A man can lose himself chasing the truth, but he can also find his strength there." I lay awake long after he'd gone to bed, listening to the creak of his old house and the hum of the refrigerator. The image of that watch glowed in my mind, like a beacon, equal parts accusation and confirmation. I knew then that my next steps would determine not only whether justice was served, but whether my family name would carry honor or shame into another generation. So I made a vow I would gather every shred of evidence, build a case stronger than any excuse, and only then would I look my son in the eye and demand the truth. Now let me ask you, if you discovered proof of betrayal in your child's home, would you strike immediately, Or would you build your case brick by brick like I did? I chose proof over pride. Sitting at my neighbor Roy's kitchen table, I laid out my notes like blueprints for a bridge I had no choice but to cross. Each entry was a step closer to the truth, but also a step further from the son I thought I knew. The first pawn shop I called was Pete's Pawn Palace on Dodge Street. I described the watch in detail, the brass case, the worn leather strap, the bent crown that gave it away. Pete's voice crackled on the line. "Yeah, I remember that one." Guy came in, looked nervous, mid-30s, dark hair. Said it was his grandfather's watch, needed cash quick. Gave him $300 for it. Piece like that's worth a lot more, $300. That was all my son thought our legacy was worth. My hand shook as I wrote down the date on the receipt Pete faxed over May 13th, right in the middle of my trip to California. 2 more shops confirmed what I already feared. My television had been sold at Second Chance Electronics. Ella's jewelry showed up at Golden Memories consignment. Different clerks, different receipts, but always the same description. A man in his 30s, nervous rushing, handing over valuables that were worth far more than the price he accepted. By the time I stacked those papers in my folder, the doubt that had haunted me was gone. The pattern was too precise, too consistent. It was Melvin. But instead of collapsing under the weight of that truth, I felt a strange calm. For the first time since I stepped into my broken home, I wasn't lost in grief or fear. I had a direction. That evening, I returned to my house no longer just a victim standing among ruins, but an investigator walking through a crime scene. I retraced every step, the back door splintered by careful force, the drawers emptied, in order the safe cracked open with methodical hands. It wasn't chaos. It was a plan executed by someone who knew the layout as well as I did. Standing in the study, I whispered to the empty walls, "You thought I wouldn't find out, son, but I will." My voice echoed back steadier than I expected. When I left that night, I carried not only my folder of evidence but also a decision. I would confront Melvin face to face, but not with shouting or accusations. I would confront him with facts, pawn shop receipts, witness statements, and photographs. And when he saw it all laid out, there would be no place left to hide. As I turned the key in Roy's borrowed car, I thought of Ella. She always said I was too trusting that someday it would cost me. She was right. But she also believed in accountability even when it hurt. So now I'll turn to you. If the trail of evidence led straight to your own child, would you still chase it to the end, even knowing it might destroy what little family you had left? A father's memory can be sharper than a detective's lens. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that watch on Melvin's mantle gleaming like an accusation. But memory alone wouldn't be enough, not for the police, not for a court, and not for my own conscience. I needed proof so strong that even my son couldn't talk his way around it. I started with a simple system. On my kitchen table, now cleared of broken glass and debris, I laid out a clean notebook, a stack of envelopes, and a manila folder. Every page, every receipt, every conversation went straight into that folder. My years as an engineer had trained me to respect precision, and now that discipline became my weapon. The first entry, May 13th, the date stamped on Pete's pawn receipt for my father's watch. I wrote it down, then stapled the copy Pete had given me. Next came the receipt from Second Chance Electronics, where my television had been sold for a fraction of its value. Then Golden Memories consignment, Ella's jewelry reduced to trinkets in a display case. 3 separate shops, 3 different clerks, all describing a nervous man in his 30s, mid-height dark hair. I stared at those pages until the ink blurred. It was my son. There was no doubt left. Still, I kept going because doubt is the refuge of the weak, and I couldn't afford weakness now. The next step was the neighbors. Mrs. Peterson, 3 houses down, welcomed me into her kitchen with a plate of sugar cookies and more curiosity than judgment. "Yes, I saw that Honda Civic," she said, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "Pulled right into your driveway. I thought you were home early. Must have been the 13th around 2 in the afternoon." She frowned. Funny thing, though. He was in such a hurry I barely recognized him. Her words went into the notebook, followed by the Henderson's security camera stills, time-stamped 2:17 p.m., showing Melvin's license plate as clear as daylight. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed into a picture too sharp to deny. That night, I spread everything out on Roy's dining table: receipts, witness statements, photos. He studied them in silence, his hands clasped like a soldier reviewing a battle map. Finally, he said, "Silas, this isn't suspicion anymore. This is evidence. If you wanted to take it to the police tomorrow, they'd listen." But I shook my head. Not yet. I need him to see it first. I need him to know I know. Roy sighed, his weathered face lined with sympathy. "You're a braver man than me, but be careful. Desperate men do desperate things." I leaned back, exhausted but steadier than I had been in weeks. This wasn't just about theft anymore. It was about honor, about showing my son that actions have consequences even when blood is involved. "So let me ask you, if you had the evidence in hand, would you march straight to the police? Or would you confront your child face to face first, like I planned to?" Every signature felt like a nail in a coffin. The pawn tickets were printed in cheap ink, but to me they might as well have been written in stone. Pete's Pawn Palace, May 13th. Second Chance Electronics, May 14th. Golden Memories Consignment, May 15th. 3 separate dates, 3 separate betrayals. Each one carried the faint outline of my son's handwriting, shaky and rushed, though he'd tried to disguise it. I copied every detail into my notebook: dates, times, values, and descriptions. The television that once filled my evenings with ball games and the sound of laughter sold for less than $200. Ella's jewelry, which she had polished every Sunday morning before church, pawned for pocket change. My father's watch, a century of history, gone for a mere $300. The thought twisted my stomach. It wasn't just theft. It was desperation. The kind of desperation that sells a lifetime of love and legacy for a single night at a casino table. And yet, as furious as I felt, I also grieved. I grieved for the boy who once cried over breaking a window with a baseball, who had promised me at 12 years old he'd always take care of family. Somewhere along the line, that boy had vanished, leaving a man who could look me in the eye and lie without flinching. Roy watched me as I sorted through the stack of papers, spreading them across his dining room like evidence in a courtroom. "Silas," he said gently, "you can't carry this alone. At some point you have to hand it to the authorities." "I will," I replied, "but not until Melvin sees it first. He needs to understand that I didn't accuse him blindly. I built this case with the same care I built every bridge and machine in my career. When he sees it all laid out, he won't be able to deny it." Roy leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "And if he tries, then the police will finish what I started." I slid each receipt into the manila folder, arranging them in chronological order. Then came the witness statements. Mrs. Peterson's memory of seeing his car, the Henderson's camera footage, Roy's own account of spotting him twice. By the time I was done, the folder was nearly an inch thick, heavy like the weight pressing on my chest. When I closed it, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, but now it had form. The anger was still there, but now it had direction. No longer was I stumbling through heartbreak. I was moving with purpose. I looked up at Roy and said quietly, This isn't just about justice. It's about showing him that his actions have consequences. If I let this slide, what kind of father would I be? Roy nodded slowly. Then you'd better be ready for what comes next. Because once you open that folder in front of him, there's no going back. So let me ask you, would you be willing to carry that kind of folder into your child's home, knowing it could end your family as you knew it? I followed him not as a father, but as a witness. One Friday evening, after another long day of sorting through evidence, I parked Roy's old Camry a block away from Melvin's auto shop and waited. His shift ended at 7. Sure enough, I watched him walk out, shoulders hunched, wiping grease from his hands onto a rag. But instead of heading home, he drove straight toward the highway. I kept my distance, trailing his Honda Civic through familiar streets until neon lights broke the horizon. Riverbend Casino. My chest tightened as I pulled into the lot a few rows back from his car. There was no hesitation in his stride. He walked inside like a man returning to his church, confident, purposeful, blind to everything else. 2 hours later, I was still there, sitting in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel until they cramped. When Melvin finally emerged, he looked smaller than when he had gone in. Shoulders slumped, eyes hollow, the walk of a man who had lost more than he could afford. He didn't notice me as he slid back into his car and drove off into the night. The pieces clicked into place like a cruel puzzle. The pawn shop, receipts, the nervous behavior, the lies, all of it pointed to one thing: gambling. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He had stolen to feed an addiction that devoured reason and drowned responsibility. I drove home slowly, headlights carving tunnels through the dark. The betrayal hurt, but the addiction frightened me. Addiction doesn't stop at one theft or one lie. It spreads like fire, taking everything in its path. And if he had already risked our family's history, what else would he risk before he realized he was standing in ashes? That night I sat again at my kitchen table with the manila folder open before me. This time I added a new section labeled Motive. Under it I wrote one word: gambling. Then I stapled a photo I had snapped on my phone, Melvin walking into the casino. Proof, not suspicion. Facts, not feelings. Roy joined me for coffee, his presence steady as always. I showed him the photo, the receipts, the statements. He shook his head slowly. You've got him cornered now. But Silas, cornered men are dangerous. I know, I admitted. But I won't let him think he fooled me. He has to face what he's done. Roy reached across the table and set his hand on the folder. Just remember, when you open this in front of him, you're not just showing your son evidence. You're holding up a mirror. And he might not like what he sees. I looked at the folder, thick with paper, that carried the weight of betrayal and love twisted into one. My heart ached, but my resolve was clear. The time for hoping was over. The time for confronting had come. So tell me, if you discovered your child's betrayal was driven by addiction, would that make it easier to forgive or harder to hold them accountable? I wasn't going to argue. I was going to present. That was the thought that steadied me as I sat at my kitchen table, spreading the evidence across its scarred surface like a general laying out a battle map. No shouting, no accusations, just receipts, witness statements, photographs, and timelines. Cold, undeniable facts. I rehearsed what I would say, speaking softly into the silence of my broken home. Melvin, I know what you did. Here's the proof. You can't lie your way out of this. The words felt strange on my tongue, like lead in my mouth. But I needed to hear them out loud before I ever stood in front of him. The manila folder had grown thicker than I'd planned. Receipts from 3 pawn shops, witness testimony from Mrs. Peterson, still shots of his license plate on the Henderson's camera, and now the photo I had taken of him striding into Riverbend Casino. It was all there, each piece confirming the next, a lattice of betrayal too tight to break. Roy came by that evening with dinner in hand, meatloaf and mashed potatoes, the kind of food that could anchor a man who was drifting. He watched me stack the papers back into the folder with precision. "You're ready, Silas?" He said, his voice calm but grave. "I need to be," I replied. "Because once I lay this in front of him, there's no turning back. He'll know I've seen him for who he's become." Roy nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Just be careful. A man trapped by evidence can lash out harder than one accused without it." I thought of Ella then, how she always told me I had a gift for patience, for letting the truth reveal itself. "Don't waste your breath shouting, Silas," she used to say. "Just show them the facts. The truth always has more weight than anger." For the first time since she passed, I felt her presence guiding me. The next morning, I placed the folder on the passenger seat of Roy's Camry. It sat there like a loaded weapon, silent but heavy, reminding me of the line I was about to cross. I drove slowly, every traffic light feeling like a test of my resolve. When I pulled into Melvin's driveway, I saw the same peeling paint, the same neglected lawn, signs of a life unraveling. But this time I wasn't there to observe quietly. I was there to reveal what I knew. I sat for a moment in the car, staring at his front door. The watch was still on his mantel. I could almost see it in my mind, glinting in the light like a beacon of betrayal. Soon it would no longer be a silent witness. Soon it would be Exhibit A. I took a deep breath, gripped the folder tight, and stepped out of the car. My heart was heavy, but my steps were steady. This was no longer about hope. It was about truth. And so I'll ask you, if you had one chance to confront your child with every piece of evidence in your hands, would you walk through that door as I did? When love fails, structure holds. That was the mantra I repeated as I stood outside my son's front door, the manila folder heavy in my hands. Decades of fatherhood pressed against me, every scraped knee, every birthday candle, every college tuition payment, and now it all led here. I wasn't a father about to scold his boy. I was a man about to reveal the truth. Melvin opened the door slower than usual, his face pale, eyes darting behind me, as if he feared I had brought someone else. "Dad," he said, his voice uncertain. "What are you doing here again?" I stepped inside without answering, my shoes crunching against the clutter on his floor. The living room looked the same as before, messy, tired, weighed down by bills and empty bottles. And there it was, right where it had been, my father's pocket watch on the mantel, gleaming like a beacon of betrayal. I placed the folder on the coffee table and sat down. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't crack. "Melvin," I said, "we need to talk." He sank into the armchair across from me, his leg bouncing, his fingers drumming against the armrest. About what he asked, though, we both knew the answer. I opened the folder and spread out the first receipt. Pete's Pawn Palace, May 13th. Then the second chance electronics. Then the third Golden Memories consignment. Each page landed on the table with the weight of a hammer driving nails into a coffin. Melvin's eyes widened, then narrowed. "What is this?" he asked, his voice high with panic. "This," I said calmly, "is the truth. You sold the television. You sold your mother's jewelry. You sold our family's watch. And I have the proof." He looked toward the mantelpiece, then back at me, his face drained of color. "I told you I bought that at a pawn shop." I slid a photocopy of Pete's receipt across the table. "The description matches you. The date matches the week I was gone. Witnesses saw your car. Cameras caught your license plate. And now I have a picture of you walking into the casino." His mouth opened and closed without sound, his face crumpling as if the weight of the evidence pressed down on him. For the first time, I saw not defiance, but fear. "You've built quite a case," he whispered almost to himself. I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. "This isn't a case, Melvin. This is our life. This is your betrayal." The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of that stolen watch on the mantel. Every second felt like judgment. I gathered the papers back into the folder and closed it with finality. "You can deny it all you want," I said, standing. "But the truth is right here. And soon you'll have to face it." As I turned toward the door, Melvin reached out as if to stop me, then let his hand fall back to his side. He didn't speak. He didn't confess. He just sat there, a man trapped between guilt and pride. "So let me ask you, if you had just laid undeniable proof in front of your own child, would you give him one last chance to admit it? Or would you take the next step straight to justice?" I walked in with paper. He reached for pity. The moment I laid the folder on his table, I saw it in his eyes, that scramble for excuses, that frantic search for any lever he could pull to soften the blow. "Dad," Melvin began, his voice breaking, "you don't understand. I didn't have a choice." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice calm. "There's always a choice, son. You chose to sell your mother's jewelry. You chose to pawn our family's watch. You chose to walk into that casino." His face twisted with desperation. "You think I wanted this? They were going to hurt Wendy. I owed people $15,000, and they don't accept late payments. It was either pay up or—" He trailed off, his hands trembling. For a moment, my heart cracked. Wendy was innocent in this, and the thought of her being threatened sent a cold chill down my spine. But then I remembered Ella's words. Never let excuses cover dishonor. The truth is still the truth. "You should have come to me," I said firmly. "You should have asked for help." His eyes flared with anger. "Help? You would have given me one of your lectures about responsibility, about choices, about how I keep screwing up." I couldn't stand to hear it again. I kept my gaze steady. "And instead of hearing words, you'll face consequences." He shot to his feet, pacing the room like a trapped animal. "You can't do this to me, Dad. I'm your son. Blood is supposed to mean something. Blood means everything," I replied, my voice low but sharp. "That's why this hurts more than anything else. Because you, my own flesh and blood, looked me in the eye and lied." The silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. He collapsed back into his chair, his hands covering his face, his shoulders shaking. For a moment, I thought I saw a boy again, the boy who once clung to me after nightmares, asking if I would always protect him. But then he looked up, eyes red, and tried again. "Please, Dad. Just let me fix this. Give me a little time and I'll buy everything back. You'll never have to know." I opened the folder once more, sliding the receipts and photographs toward him. "I already know. And you can't buy back trust. That's gone." The watch ticked behind him on the mantel, each second echoing louder than his excuses. He slumped back defeated, but I could still feel his eyes searching for an escape route. "So let me ask you, if your child stood before you, drowning in excuses and half-truths, would you let pity guide your decision, or would you hold steady to the evidence in your hands?" Addiction speaks fluent blame. That's what I realized as I listened to Melvin's words tumble out like dice across a casino table, fast, desperate, and loaded with excuses. "You don't get it, Dad," he said, his voice trembling but sharp. "I didn't steal because I wanted to. I stole because I had no choice. You think you're so righteous, but you never had to deal with men like the ones I owe. They don't wait politely for paychecks. They don't care about family." I sat quietly, letting him spew the poison that had been building in his chest. My silence seemed to infuriate him more than any rebuke. He slammed his fist against the arm of the chair. Say something. Don't just sit there like you're better than me. I finally spoke, steady as steel. You had choices. You always did. But you gambled them away one by one until you sold the last pieces of our family's legacy for pocket change. His eyes darted to the folder still open on the table, its contents spread like an indictment. He tried again. I was going to win it back, one big night at the tables that was all it would take. Then I'd buy everything back and you'd never know. I leaned forward. That's the lie every gambler tells himself. One more win. But the house always wins, Melvin. And you've lost more than money, you've lost honor. He shot to his feet again, pacing in quick, agitated steps. Honor doesn't pay bills. Honor doesn't keep Wendy safe. You sit there in judgment, but you don't know what it's like to feel that kind of pressure. I rose slowly, my gaze following him. You're right. I don't know what it's like to steal from my own father. I don't know what it's like to pawn my mother's jewelry. But I do know what it's like to work for decades to save, to sacrifice, so my son would never have to make choices like these. His face contorted, and for a moment I saw both the frightened boy and the furious man wrestling inside him. He reached toward the folder, as if snatching the papers could erase them. I held the folder down firmly with my hand. You can't tear away the truth, son. It's written here, and it's written in the silence every time you avoid my eyes. The room seemed to tighten around us. His breaths came quick and shallow, his hands trembling at his sides. If you take this to the police, you'll ruin me. You'll destroy your own family. I met his gaze with all the calm I could muster. No, Melvin. You've already destroyed what we had. The question now is whether you'll accept the consequences or keep running from them. The ticking of the watch on the mantel filled the silence that followed each beat, a reminder that time was running out for both of us. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you see his words as a cry for help, or just another attempt to manipulate your heart? Some lines you never think you'll cross. For me, that line was calling the police on my own son. But in that living room, surrounded by receipts, pawn slips, and the steady ticking of my father's watch, I knew the moment had come. Melvin's voice rose higher, frantic. You can't do this. I'm your son. You'd rather see me in handcuffs than give me a chance to fix this. He stepped closer. His fists clenched, his eyes wild with desperation. I held my ground. You've had chances, Melvin. More than most men ever get. But you used them to gamble, to lie, and to steal. Now the choices are no longer yours. He lunged toward me, then reaching for the folder. I pushed back from the coffee table, clutching the evidence to my chest. The sudden shift made the watch on the mantel swing slightly, catching the afternoon light like a spotlight on our family's shame. Dad, stop, he shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. Think about Mom. She'd never forgive you for this. She'd say family comes first. The words cut like a blade, but instead of weakening me, they steeled my resolve. Your mother would be ashamed of what you've become, I said, my voice firm. She believed family meant honor, not betrayal. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb trembling only slightly, as I dialed 3 numbers I thought I'd never call in this context. 911, 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice sliced through Melvin's protests. My house was robbed 2 weeks ago, I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. I have the perpetrator here with me, along with evidence. Melvin's eyes went wide and he lunged again, trying to grab the phone. I stepped back, my body fueled by something deeper than age could weaken. The perpetrator is my son. I continued, and he is attempting to prevent me from reporting the crime. He is not armed, but he is desperate. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line until officers arrived. Those 15 minutes stretched into eternity. Melvin alternated between pacing like a caged animal and collapsing into the chair with his head in his hands, muttering pleas that sounded more like bargains with himself than with me. When the sirens finally cut through the air outside, his face went pale. "Dad, please, don't let them take me. We can fix this. Just give me one more chance." I looked at him, my son, my flesh and blood, and felt a grief deeper than any I'd ever known. But I didn't put down the phone. I didn't open the door for compromise. I stood tall as the knock sounded, knowing that once those officers stepped inside, there would be no turning back. So let me ask you, if you were standing in that room, would you have hung up before the sirens arrived? Or would you have let justice walk through that door, as I did? Truth can empty a room. That's what I learned the moment 2 uniformed officers stepped inside my son's living room. The air shifted from desperation to inevitability. Melvin froze his eyes, darting from me to the folder still clutched in my hand. "Mr. Mills, Officer Johnson," said the same man who had walked through my ransacked home weeks earlier. "We responded to your burglary report. You said you've identified the perpetrator." I nodded and placed the folder on the coffee table with deliberate precision. "Yes, it was my son. And here's the proof." Melvin erupted. "This is insane. He's making it up. It's just a family fight." His words cracked with panic, his face red with a mixture of fear and fury. Officer Martinez knelt to photograph the receipts, the pawn slips, the witness statements. Johnson examined the photo of Melvin entering Riverbend Casino, his expression unreadable. Then his eyes lifted to the mantelpiece where the watch ticked steadily, damning without a word. "This matches the description in your original report," Johnson said quietly, almost respectfully. "Distinctive bent crown, visible scratch." Wendy burst through the door, then still in her work uniform. Her eyes widening as she saw the scene, her husband cornered 2 officers documenting evidence, her father-in-law standing calm but broken in the center of it all. "Melvin, what's happening?" she cried. "There's been a misunderstanding," Melvin stammered, refusing to meet her eyes. "Dad's just angry. He doesn't mean this." I turned to her, my voice steady. "I mean every word. He robbed my house. He pawned your mother-in-law's jewelry. He sold our family's watch. And I have the proof." Her scream split the room, a sound of betrayal and heartbreak no words could soften. She collapsed beside Melvin, grabbing his arm. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't do this," but his silence spoke louder than any denial could. Martinez stood holding the folder. "The evidence is strong, sir. We'll confirm with the establishments, but this is more than enough to proceed." The words hit Melvin like a gavel. Johnson recited the Miranda rights in that same calm, practiced tone I had seen on television countless times. But this wasn't television. This was my son, my blood, my legacy being cuffed in front of me. "Dad, please," he cried as they pulled him to his feet. "I'm still your son." I swallowed hard, my throat burning with grief. "That's exactly why this is necessary," I said softly. The handcuffs clicked shut, cold metal against his wrists. Wendy sobbed uncontrollably as the officers led him toward the door. The sound of it carved into my chest, but I didn't move. I couldn't. As the patrol cars pulled away, I stood in the silence of the living room, staring at the empty space on the mantel where the watch had been. Victory felt hollow. Justice had been served, but at the cost of my family's heart. So let me ask you, if you saw your own child led away in handcuffs, would you see it as betrayal or as the only hope left to save them? Justice is quiet. Consequences are loud. That's what I realized in the weeks that followed my son's arrest. The house was still broken drawers, overturned glass, long since swept up, but the absence of what had been stolen echoing louder than ever. My nights stretched on without sleep, my mind replaying the sound of handcuffs snapping shut around Melvin's wrists. Court papers arrived in thick envelopes, stamped and sealed. I sat at Roy's kitchen table each morning with a mug of coffee growing cold, staring at legal documents that described my son not as Melvin, but as the defendant. Reading those words was like swallowing glass. I had raised a boy, and now the law was raising a case against him. The district attorney's office explained that because the stolen items were valued at more than $1,000, felony charges applied. Probation was possible, maybe even likely, but prison was still on the table. My testimony would be critical. The idea of sitting in a courtroom looking my son in the eye while describing how he robbed me felt unbearable, but so did the thought of letting him escape accountability. Neighbors whispered. Some called me strong, a man of principle. Others shook their heads, saying family should never betray family to the law. Mrs. Peterson, who had given her statement, now avoided me at the mailbox. Judgment came not just from the courts, but from every corner of the community. And yet I knew there was no other way. If I had looked the other way, if I had chosen silence, Melvin's addiction would have swallowed him whole. Sometimes the hardest love is the only love that saves. One afternoon, I visited him at the correctional center. We spoke through glass, our voices echoing through the distorted speaker. His face looked thinner, his eyes harder. "Are you satisfied now?" he asked bitterly. "I wanted you to face consequences, not become bitter," I replied. "What did you expect, that I'd thank you for destroying my life?" he spat. The conversation went nowhere. His words stabbed, but I left knowing I had done what needed to be done. A father's duty isn't always to shield, it's sometimes to hold the mirror steady until the child sees what he's become. Weeks turned into months. Finally, the plea agreement was reached: 2 years of probation, mandatory gambling, counseling, community service, restitution for everything he had sold. No prison time, but a heavy weight to carry. The sentence was meant to correct, not to crush. Standing outside the courthouse afterward, I didn't feel victory or relief. I felt emptiness, the kind that comes after a storm when the debris is still scattered, but the air is eerily still. I walked home alone, the folder of evidence now in the hands of the court, my mantle empty where the watch once sat. The battle was over, but the war for my son's soul had only just begun. So let me ask you, if the law gave your child probation instead of prison, would you see it as mercy or as another chance for them to disappoint you? Courtrooms don't heal you. They stop the bleeding. That's the lesson I carried with me the day I walked into Douglas County Courthouse to testify against my own son. The walls smelled of old carpet and burnt coffee, the kind of scent that lingers with bureaucracy. Strangers in pressed suits shuffled by, calling names, filing motions, treating human tragedy like routine paperwork. When they called State versus Melvin Mills, I stood. My knees felt weaker than they had when I climbed scaffolding in my working years, but my back stayed straight. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. And then I did what I never thought I'd have to do. I described in detail how my own son had broken into my house, opened my safe, and stolen the watch that had belonged to his great-grandfather. Melvin sat across the courtroom in a suit too large for his frame, his eyes dark hollows staring at the table. He didn't look at me once. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he wouldn't. I gave my testimony in the same voice I'd used all my life when presenting engineering reports, clear, factual, steady. But inside, every word burned like fire. The prosecutor asked questions I already knew the answers to. The defense tried to paint the picture of a man trapped by debt and bad luck. And then when the session ended, the judge looked down at us all and set the sentencing date. 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, restitution, community service. It was the compromise between punishment and mercy. Walking out of that courtroom, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a man who had just amputated a limb to save the body. Necessary, but devastating. Roy met me outside, his hand firm on my shoulder. "You did what had to be done," he said. "Don't doubt it." But doubt doesn't leave that easily. That night I sat in my quiet house, staring at the empty mantel, wondering if Ella would have understood. She always believed in grace, but she also believed in honor. I tried to believe she would have stood where I did, drawing the hard line, holding our son accountable when he could not hold himself. Weeks passed, and life carried on with mechanical rhythm. I mowed the lawn, repaired the back door, paid my bills. But every time the phone rang, my chest tightened, half expecting to hear Melvin's voice, half dreading it. When the letter finally came from him, written in his uneven handwriting, I held it like a relic. "Dad, the counselor says I need to understand why you did this. I'm trying. Maybe we can talk when I'm ready. Still your son, Mel." For the first time in months, I slept through the night. So let me ask you, if your child finally admitted they were trying to understand, would that be enough to ease your burden? Or would you wait for real change before believing them? I packed boxes, not bitterness. That's how I explained it to myself, as I folded shirts, wrapped framed photographs in newspaper, and stacked memories into cardboard marked Arizona. Omaha had been home for more than 2 decades, but now the walls whispered with betrayal every night I tried to sleep. The mantel where Ella's picture once stood felt like an open wound. Roy helped me tape up the heavier boxes, his hands steady, his words few. He didn't need to say much. He had already given me more than I could ever repay: a couch to sleep on, hot meals, quiet companionship, when I thought I might drown in silence. "You sure about this?" he asked as he sealed the last box. "I'm not running," I told him. "I'm choosing to heal somewhere new." The letter from Melvin lay on the kitchen counter, edges worn from the times I had unfolded it, read it, and folded it again. His words were hesitant, but they were a beginning. He hadn't asked me for money. He hadn't made excuses. He was trying. That meant something. Arizona offered something Omaha no longer could distance. My sister lived there, and she called every week after learning what had happened, her voice full of warmth and reminders that family could still mean loyalty. I needed that. I needed to believe blood wasn't only betrayal. Roy drove me to the airport the morning I left. We didn't talk much, just exchanged stories from our younger years, like 2 old men filling the silence with echoes of life before things grew complicated. When we reached the terminal, he carried my heaviest bag without asking. At the gate, he gave me a hug that was both farewell and promise. "Take care of yourself, Silas. And don't wait too long to answer when that boy finally calls." I boarded the plane with mixed emotions: sorrow for what I was leaving, hope for what I might find. The flight west stretched across quiet miles, giving me time to think. Out the window, the landscape shifted from green to desert-brown mountains, rising like reminders that some burdens make sense only from a distance. In Arizona, my new apartment overlooked a range of rugged peaks. The air was dry, the sunsets fierce with purple and gold. On the nightstand beside Ella's photograph sat the watch returned to me after the case was resolved. It ticked steadily, a sound that was both a reminder of betrayal and a promise of second chances. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not complete, not final, but enough to breathe without heaviness pressing down on my chest. So let me ask you, if you had the chance to leave behind the house that carried your deepest wound, would you stay and try to mend it, or would you start over somewhere new? As I did, addiction breaks quietly. So does pride. That's what I thought as I sat in my Arizona apartment months after the sentencing. Life had settled into a rhythm: morning walks, coffee on the balcony, weekly calls with my sister. And yet every time I glanced at Ella's photo beside the ticking watch, my thoughts drifted back to Melvin. One afternoon, a letter arrived, the handwriting uneven but unmistakable. 3 pages longer than the first, written with the kind of care that only comes when a man is forced to slow down and think. I unfolded it carefully, my hands trembling. Dad, the gambling counselor, says I have to accept responsibility before I can make amends. You were right. The theft wasn't about money. It was about feeding something that had already destroyed my judgment. I see that now. I know you didn't do this to hurt me. You did it because you love me enough to let me face the truth. I'm sorry it took the law to teach me what you tried to teach me all my life. I set the pages down and let the words sink in. They weren't excuses. They weren't bargains. They were admissions. And for the first time since the arrest, I felt the faint stirrings of hope, not for myself, but for my son. Still, hope is fragile. I had seen enough men promise change and slip back into old habits. Melvin's words were promising, but words could be cheap when addiction was involved. I needed to see consistency. I needed to see proof in his actions, not just his sentences. Roy called that evening, his voice warm even over the long distance. He's starting to get it, Silas. That's more than most men ever do. I know, I admitted, but knowing and trusting aren't the same thing. Roy chuckled softly. Trust takes time. Let him earn it. You did your part by holding the line. Now let him do his part by walking it. I thought about that long into the night, the desert air cool against the window glass. Ella's picture seemed to smile at me, as if reminding me that love didn't vanish just because it was tested. Maybe this was the beginning of a rebuilding, not the same as before, but something new forged in fire. I picked up Melvin's letter again and whispered aloud, "Maybe someday, son. Maybe someday." For now I tucked the letter beside the watch on my nightstand, 2 symbols of pain slowly transforming into possibilities of redemption. So let me ask you, if your child finally admitted their guilt and began taking real steps toward change, would you let hope back into your heart? Or would you guard it carefully until time proved them true? On her birthday, the phone rang. For a moment I thought it was a wrong number. The voice on the other end carried a weight I hadn't heard before. But then I recognized it. Dad. It's me. The silence between us was thick, stretched over months of distance and decisions that had cut deeper than any blade. I wanted to call on Mom's birthday. Melvin said, his voice tight. I thought she'd want us to talk today. I swallowed hard, staring at Ella's photograph on the nightstand. She would have, I replied quietly. She always believed in second chances. There was a pause, then his confession tumbled out. I've been sober from gambling for 8 months. The counselor says I'm ready to start making real amends. I know words aren't enough anymore, but I needed you to hear it from me. I closed my eyes, the desert sun spilling gold across my apartment. 8 months. That was more than a promise. That was effort, endurance, struggle. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it carved the first step toward something new. How do you want to begin? I asked. My voice surprised me, steady, curious, not bitter. Melvin exhaled, shaky but relieved. By listening, by hearing how much I hurt you, by admitting that I took what wasn't mine, not just things, but trust. And then, maybe by earning back small pieces day by day. We spoke for 2 hours. We talked about addiction, accountability, forgiveness. We talked about the difference between enabling someone and loving them enough to let them fall. He admitted he had hated me for calling the police, but he also admitted he finally understood. You didn't stop loving me, he said softly. You loved me enough to let me face the truth. When the call ended, I sat staring at the phone, my hands trembling. For the first time since the burglary, I didn't feel hollow. I felt tired, yes, but also lighter, as if some invisible weight had shifted just enough for me to stand straighter. Later that evening, I stepped onto my balcony. The Arizona sunset painted the mountains purple and gold, the kind of colors Ella used to love. The watch ticked steadily on my nightstand, keeping time not just for me, but for the fragile hope now stretching across miles between father and son. We weren't healed, not yet, but we had begun. And sometimes beginning is the hardest part of all. So let me ask you, if your child called you after months of silence, admitting fault, and asking to start again, would you open the door to reconciliation? Or would you keep it locked until trust was fully rebuilt? The watch ticks. So do second chances. That's what I thought as I sat in my Arizona apartment, the brass face gleaming softly beside Ella's photograph. 3 generations of millsmen had carried it. It was meant to rest in Melvin's hands, someday past, with honor not taken in desperation. Whether that day would still come remained uncertain, but for the first time I believed it might. 6 months after his first call, we spoke regularly. Sometimes it was short 10 minutes of updates about counseling sessions, Wendy's work, or the community service hours he was completing. Other times we talked long into the night about deeper things, fear, pride, what it means to be a man who keeps his word. He didn't beg for money. He didn't make excuses. He simply told me the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. That more than anything showed me change was real. One evening I asked him directly, "Why now, Melvin? Why fight so hard this time?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because when you called the police, I hated you. But I realized later you were the only one who hadn't given up on me. You believed I could be better, even if it meant breaking your own heart to force me there." I sat in silence, tears slipping down my cheeks. Ella would have said the same thing. Love isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it wounds before it heals. Life in Arizona grew steady. My sister's laughter filled my weekends. The desert sun burned doubt out of my bones. And yet every time the phone rang with Melvin's voice on the line, I knew the true work wasn't behind us, it was still ahead. Rebuilding trust is not a sprint. It's a lifetime marathon. One Thursday evening, as the mountains caught fire with sunset, I placed the watch in my palm, its weight grounding me. I whispered to Ella's photograph, "When he's ready, I'll give it to him." But this time, not as an inheritance he stole, but as a gift he earned. The phone rang then, and it was Melvin. His voice carried new weight, the sound of a man learning the hard way, but learning still. We spoke about the future, how he wanted to stay clean, how he wanted to be worthy of Wendy, how he hoped one day to be the kind of father who could look his own child in the eye without shame. And for the first time since the betrayal, I believed him. So let me ask you, if life gave you the chance to hand down your family's legacy, not out of duty, but out of redemption, would you hold on in bitterness, or would you let the watch tick its way into forgiving hands? Life teaches us that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that prove our love the most. Calling the police on my own son tore me apart, but letting him walk free while addiction consumed him would have destroyed him completely. Love isn't always about comfort. Sometimes it's about drawing a line even when that line feels like a blade cutting through your own heart. For months I questioned myself. Was I a father or a betrayer? But watching Melvin begin to change showed me the truth. Accountability can be the greatest gift a parent gives. Without it, there's no room for growth, no chance for redemption. With it, even the deepest betrayal can become the soil where second chances grow. I share this story not because it's easy, but because I know many of you carry wounds from family too. Maybe you've been betrayed by your children, or maybe you're a parent who has looked the other way for too long. Either way, the lesson is the same: real love sometimes requires painful choices. So I want to ask you, have you ever faced a moment where holding someone accountable felt like betrayal, but turned out to be an act of love? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story gave you something to think about, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening.